final game on Saturday is the Denver Broncos at the Detroit Lions. This one is kicking off at 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. This one's batted around a little bit this week. We're sitting now at 4.5. The Lions are 4.5-point home favorites. Total sitting at 47.5, 48 at the Fast Track inside of Ford Field. Adam, is this a bounce back spot for the Lions? Are we still as squeamish about this defense as you were in recent weeks, or are the Broncos still like this? This is a confusing game for me. I have a bet in it. I'll share that in a minute, but it was absolutely two teams that I've been looking to fade in recent weeks, and I had to try and figure out which team do I want to fade more.
If I get to that spot, then I often will just pass on a game. But I when I look at what we're getting right now defensively out of the Denver Broncos, that scares me a little bit for what it means for the potential for a bounce back for this Detroit team. Something's not right now with the Lions, and maybe it's just fourth down conversions that didn't go their way. Maybe it's just hitting a lull in the middle of the season, but I wouldn't necessarily want to find that lull against this Denver defense. So I can't get to the point of taking Denver. I can't get to the point of looking at Detroit as a bounce back. For me, it's probably a game that I would pass on entirely just because I don't really know what's wrong with Detroit's offense at the moment. And for me to try to handicap what the Lions are going to do, it has to be more about the offense. I don't, the defense showed you again last week that it's not up to the task right now. When it comes to the total in this game, you're right. I heard you mention the fast track. You get Jared Goff back inside, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just going to say 48 continues to be a very high number in today's NFL, with two offenses that have shown that they can move the ball and not put points on the board. So if you made me bet something in this game, I would probably bet under 48, but I'm going to pass on it.
I very nervously bet on the Lions to cover this number, and I decided I still hate the Broncos. And I hate specifically the Broncos if they're going to wind up in a negative game script here. First of all, let's start with what I see with the Lions offense. They are getting Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow back on the offensive line, which is a big deal. Both were full participants on the final injury report, which was Thursday, since this was a Saturday game. And I think Detroit's going to be able to run the ball really well in this one. That's a great starting point for Jared Goff to take some pressure off of him, because since week 7, the Denver defense is 26th in rushing success rate allowed when you filter out garbage time. And we know how potent Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery can be. The flip side here is the Denver offense. And since week 7, which is the start of their winning streak, they've only lost one game since week 7. The offense still isn't impressing. If you filter out garbage time, Russell Wilson and company are still 20th by EPA in success rate and 26th in drop back success rate. So they've had very poor pass game consistency down to down. And what we've seen is just some fourth quarter magic. If you just look at fourth quarter advanced metrics, they're in that span since week 7. They're top 10 in the league. So a lot of comebacks. I don't know how much. Like, Adam, tell me if you disagree. But over time, it seems that what you do in the fourth quarter is less predictive than what we see in the first 3 quarters. At least that's kind of what I've seen. If there's that big of a split between what they're doing full game and what they're doing fourth quarter, that kind of makes me nervous a little bit.
Sure. And we want to try to handicap what we know, right? And what is predictable is being able to look at how the teams perform on their script in the first quarter, right? How do they perform in those first 15 plays? The only thing you can be predictive about is when they get into X game state, do they throw it or run it more? And how fast do they play, right? We can look at pace stats and we can figure out, okay, when they're up 7 or down 7, do they play faster? Do they play slower? And try to forecast what they're going to do with regard to that. But for me, a lot of that comes down to, when I'm looking at those stats, I'm largely looking at, do I think X, Y, or Z team can be a backdoor cover team, right? Do I think they're going to play in such a way in the fourth quarter that even if they end up down by 14 and we're talking about a 7.5 spread, that they're live to come back and cover that 7. So, a lot of fourth quarter game state is going to dictate what you get out of that team. So that can be predictable if you've got, say, a very bad team that's behind a lot that's going to throw the ball often, sure. But it's not something that I necessarily want to be basing a full game handicap on.
Yeah, I'll say a little prayer that Jared and his tiny hands Goff doesn't fumble the ball a couple more times here. They've had some bad turnover luck in recent weeks, and I trust this offense in the dome against still a pretty tough Denver defense, but I think they run the ball really well here. I think that's a really solid matchup for them. So, with how bad we've documented very well on this pod how bad the Lions defense has been in recent weeks, I'm just not sure the Broncos offense can do enough to actually take advantage of it. So, certainly not my favorite bet of the week, but here goes nothing. Here goes nothing with this Detroit defense.